Welcome to all of you who are showing up on time. Appreciate it. We are going to give everyone maybe about 5 minutes or so to come in, and we'll start around 6:35. At least if you're joining us from LA or on Pacific Standard Time. While we're waiting, feel free to type in the chat where you're coming from. If you even know what General Assembly is, I'll definitely give a little bit of a background on that when we get started. But I'm going to mute myself and feel free just to kind of get the chat going and share where you're from and if you've attended an event from General Assembly before. Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to get us started here. Just want to let you know, Michelle is on the line too. She will be assisting, but I'm going to kind of give you just a real brief, general intro for General Assembly. For those of you who have been to General Assembly, you probably know what it is, but if this is your first time, and Happy New Year to everybody. General Assembly really is a tech school, and it's to learn how to change careers. And if you're looking at a field like digital marketing or coding or something like that, it's a great sort of different, I would say, different model. I fell in love with it, just the idea that a lot of times when you come out through a um, like a regular institution, a lot of times what happens is, you get a degree and you're sort of out there in the real world. Well, unfortunately, a lot of times that degree is not going to equate to a skill that you're going to use right away. And the nice thing with General Assembly is that they have things set up when you take an immersive program where you basically have all the resources at your hand, including alumni, including recruiters, including someone looking over your resume, your cover letter, things like that. And so you're really ready to go. So it's really like a program where you just jump in and you take it, and then you're able to jump into a job right away. And so I see a lot of people here coming into careers where they're like, hey, I've done this for 5 or 10 years, don't really like it that much. I feel like tech is a really booming industry. I want to get involved, but I don't have the skills. Or some of you do have the skills and you're thinking about how do you level up. So I would recommend, just from a personal level, General Assembly is great at that. There's campuses all over the place. Obviously, right now, you don't have to go to a physical location. You can do it virtually. That's the beauty of it. And so someone is going to contact you afterwards with a follow-up email. You're going to get the link for this event if you want to see it again, or you want to pass it on to a friend. And also, too, you're going to get a discount for a future event. So General Assembly has things like this, which are free events. They also have part-time and full-time events too. And if you haven't checked them out before, please do, because it's a great program. I've been privileged to be with them for a couple of years where I'm able to host events. Used to be in person, but now it's been virtual for the last like 10 months or so. I love it. I really enjoy it. And it's been a transition to go from in-person to virtual, but doing it for almost a year now, I'd like to say I'm better at it. I'd like to hope so. So I think you'll enjoy tonight. Let me give just a real quick introduction of myself. So my name is Scott Asai. Like I said, I've been working with General Assembly for the last 2+ years. I used to do coaching. Now I do keynote speaking. I actually did a in-person TED Talk in Hawaii this past February. It was entitled Saving Soft Skills from Extinction. Very fortunate to get it in right before everything shut down. And obviously, being a speaker and doing most things in person, having a transition, it's been a transition for me too, but it's something that I've enjoyed. The commute's great. All I have to do is wake up, get out of bed, put on a shirt and hop in my seat. So that's been nice. But one of the things that I really love about these events is that I get to recruit and network with great speakers like tonight's speaker, Christy, who I've met before. And, it keeps me sort of on my toes. And I think one piece of advice I'll give you, and I don't want to steal too much of Christy's thunder, but is that, you should be networking now virtually, and you can't wait until things open up. This may be how things are going to be going forward. I believe that even when things do return, it's going to be a hybrid model anyway. So if you don't know how to network via LinkedIn, if you don't know how to network, just doing through video chat and texting and emailing, those are skills you're going to have to learn. Just like I've had to learn how to present on camera. It's a lot different than presenting in person, but things are changing and we need to evolve and we need to beef up our skills. And that's what really tonight is all about. So I'm going to give you sort of some housekeeping things before we get started. For those of you who haven't done Zoom before, which is probably none of you, please put yourself on mute unless your name is Christy or Scott. And we're going to have a conversation. Feel free to type things into the chat box. I'm going to try to look through it, do my best to multitask. And at the end, we're going to spend a dedicated probably 30 minutes or so, just Q&A stuff. So this is your chance to pick Christy's brain. She's an author. She's a career expert. She's a marketing executive. You're going to be able to sort of hear our conversation we're going to have. I'm going to be asking her questions. It's going to be sort of like a fireside chat, even like a podcast, where you're going to be like a fly on the wall listening to us talk. And then we're going to pause, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. So I would encourage you, if you do have questions, maybe hold them to the end. And because we are on Zoom meeting, feel free to get on camera. I know it's a little intimidating. People love to sort of go and black their screens out and have their names on there. But Christy and I would have more fun if we saw your face. And if you want to interact with us, especially when we get to Q&A time, please get on video and ask questions. So with that being said, I met Christy actually because she reached out to me actually on LinkedIn. So she was ahead of her time before everything crashed. She reached out because I was doing career stuff. She does career stuff, and she was writing a book, and I was able to do a little excerpt from it. And so it's been a pleasure sort of getting to know her. We've done an event together and being able to do another one. I think it's fun to be able to talk about career development with someone else, because we get so caught up in ourselves and kind of in a vacuum, and we have these conceptions of what works, what doesn't work, and sometimes we're way off. You know? And so tonight, I'm going to ask her a lot of questions, and hopefully they are questions that you've been asking yourself and answers that you want to know, because you know, our careers are a journey, and it's something that we never really figure out. It's constantly evolving, and that means that we have to evolve our skills too. But it's always great to hear someone who's in the trenches and doing it, and to understand, hey, this is what's working, this is what's not working. So if you're doing it wrong, stop and do something different. And I think that's what you're going to really enjoy from Christy tonight. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into it. And I'm just going to ask Christy just to kind of introduce yourself really quickly and talk to us a little bit about your career so far. Like, tell me what your background is, let everybody know what you've been doing and what you're doing now.
Sure, happy to. And thanks for having me, everyone. Hello, and thanks, Scott. The short answer is I'm a marketing executive. I'm a career expert. I am an Ironman triathlete, and I'm a foster dog mom. And when Scott and I were prepping for this, one of the things he said was, well, tell us about your career. Did it go as planned? And I would say, no, like nothing about any of that was ever planned. So the long story version was I had aspirations of being a television news journalist. I was going to be Hoda Kotb or Savannah Guthrie and be hosting the Today Show. So I did all the things you were supposed to do. I interned at local news stations. I worked for a syndicated radio company. I ended up getting a job at a local sports, regional sports network, which was a lot of fun. But I was watching what the sales and marketing people were doing, and I was thinking, well, that's kind of actually really cool. And so after a couple of years there, I ended up going to a music company in the marketing side, and it was sort of a startup, and worked my way up and ran the marketing department there. Was working too much and too long, and so signed up for a triathlon as a way to get myself out of the office. Knowing I'm goal oriented, I thought, well, I got this gym membership that's not being used, but maybe if I sign up for a triathlon, of which I know zero, that'll get me, to the gym. So I did, and it did, and did my first triathlon. And people say, well, you're going to do an Ironman. I'm like, no, hell no, no way, never. And worked my way up to being an Ironman. And one of the ways I trained for that is I started working with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and their team and training program, because I didn't know how to train for a long distance triathlon. And so I was fundraising while I was training, and really got inspired by working with nonprofits and fundraising, and really couldn't figure out how I was going to make a living doing that, because compensation for nonprofits are not as high as in the for-profit world. And then ultimately found a job, kind of stumbled into a job again, back to nothing was as planned, doing marketing for a nonprofit fundraising software company. And now along the way, my dad and I were talking, and he had started a book and I had started a book, and we thought, well, had no idea we were both doing this, and kind of joined forces and co-wrote the book. And now I'm doing on-camera discussions like this, which brings me back to when I wanted to be an on-camera journalist and was practicing this. I'm now doing podcast interviews, which takes me back to my radio syndication days. Launching a book, I use all my marketing skills. and all the time management that I learned and being an athlete and working full time have come full circle. So I guess, as I said, it was a long version, but my advice is I had my whole life mapped out and it didn't go anywhere down that path. But now when I look back, it comes full circle, and all those things I learned along the way that at the time I didn't know, I took the job because I needed to, or it sounded cool, but turned out it wasn't. But so many things I learned from that and I've pulled into what I do now. It's just really incredible. So, be willing to kind of go with the flow, and then know that somehow that that job or that skill you might not think is going to be beneficial to you now somehow is later. And that's, I see you nodding your head, Scott, so hopefully that means you're kind of feel the same way. But when I can point at all the pieces and say, wow, everything has come together at where I am at this moment.
Yeah, well, I think if you're coming out of college or you're coming out of a trade school or something like that, and you're jumping right into the workforce, your plan or your career plan is probably not going to go as planned. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have one, but I think using Christy's example and my example too, it's never a linear path. It's all over the place like a roller coaster. And along the way, you learn a lot of skills, and you have different experiences, and that sort of hopefully leads you to the next thing. And I think to me, it's actually encouraging to hear your story, because I think a lot of people think like, oh, well, I went to, school for a marketing degree. I got into marketing. I've been doing marketing for 20 years and blah, blah, blah sort of thing. But that's usually not the case. Not to say that if you're doing that, that's not a good thing. It's just not as normal as it used to be. So I think it's realistic to say that things are going to change, and you're going to change, and your job's going to change, because that's sort of how things go. So I think that's great. Let's jump into the more technical stuff. I think a lot of people here might want to know a little bit about like resumes, cover letters, interviews. Obviously, those are like loaded things. We could probably sit here and talk about each of them for hours, but maybe you can just touch on each of those really briefly in terms of like, what are some myths out there, and maybe what are some things that you feel like, advice that you give or things that work that maybe people aren't even thinking about?
Yeah, happy to. And this is a topic that I feel really passionate about, because I think too many people make common mistakes. And if you're not getting interviews, or if you find yourself when you're done with school and you're not getting interviews, you can kind of go back and say, I hear too many people go, oh, that's just a cold job market, or, nobody's hiring. Well, people always are hiring. They're maybe not be hiring as much as they are in an up market. But if your resume is not on point, you won't get an interview, even in a really hot job market. So it all starts with your resume, and you need to make sure it's got the things that recruiting managers and hiring managers are looking for. And by that, I mean, it doesn't need to be a full recap of your entire career. It should be your highlight reel and show your successes. So as a hiring manager, I don't want to see a lengthy job description if you were the marketing coordinator, or because I know what a marketing coordinator does. You can give me a couple of sentences of what, especially if you did something unique or different, but I want to see your impact metrics, your success metrics. So tell me what you did that was really well. What did you save time? Did you save money? Did you increase traffic? Did you, those kinds of things? Because those tell me that you are successful at whatever you did. And now I can see that you're going to be successful in the role that I'm hiring for. So it's important that, you have the right skills. So I'm not saying skip over the skills, but really spend more time on those successes, those achievements. And I like them in bullets because my eye just gravitates there, and I can go down them pretty quickly. So make sure you are spotlighting what you do well and how you've had success in it. Make sure you customize your resume for every job. And I know that's a little bit more time and effort, but it is the time and effort you want to put on into it, because that will pay off. If you have a generic resume and you send it to every job, you will probably find that it's not going to be, you're not going to be getting the results that you want, or it's going to be leaning towards a particular type of job and you might get more interviews from that job, but you're not going to get them from other ones, even though you might be equally as qualified. So I'm not saying you have to start from scratch every time, but start with your template and then go through and make sure that when you're looking at, if you're, say you're applying for a job that's posted, you know what they're looking for. Make sure those key responsibilities are reflected in your resume. Make sure some of those keywords, if they're looking for somebody who has SEO experience and SEM experience and has worked in Squarespace or knows Google Analytics as well as Google Gap, make sure all those words and all those descriptions are on your resume as well. And then you don't need to put references available on request, and you don't need to put your full address. There's a lot of stuff that I think people can leave off. Don't put your picture. You do put a LinkedIn link to your LinkedIn profile, and do customize your LinkedIn profile URL if you haven't already done that. Super easy to do, but just makes it that much easier for people to find it, or they have to type it or link to it. And then I would also say that not every job has to be presented as equal. So by that means, if you had a job that really is the one that's going to be most closely aligned, that experience most closely aligns with the job that you're applying to, spend more time on that one than another job that may be a little bit more recent, but maybe doesn't have as much to support your candidacy. So it's okay to keep that one a little shorter and then maybe beef up or spend more time on the other job. So be mindful and strategic on how you present your experience and your successes in there. And Scott, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to jump in and stay on the resume before I move on?
Oh, no, that's good. I mean, I was just kind of sort of summarize. I'm not going to catch everything you said, but, I would just highlight, some of the things, bullet point, make sure you list your accomplishments, right? Like things that are tangible that you can sort of say, like, this is what I've done before, right? LinkedIn's huge. I think that needs to be on there, right? And then also too, I think, you talk a lot about customization, right? And I think that, yes, it is time consuming, but then also too, you want to prioritize your search based upon what's going to be the best fit too. Yeah. So not all jobs are equal, Do you want to touch on cover letters?
I do, but before we do, I want to go back to something you said about LinkedIn.
Sure.
Your LinkedIn profile and your resume should not be a duplicate. They should complement, but you don't just take your resume and dump it into LinkedIn and call it a LinkedIn profile. So you get a lot more real estate in LinkedIn. You get a lot more ability to put more information about each position. You can have videos and podcast links. You can have, if you've got a portfolio or projects that you want to reference. So there's a lot more ability to really showcase that on LinkedIn. And so use that space that they give you. And so somebody will look at your hiring manager or recruiter will look at your LinkedIn profile and look at your resume. It's only to your benefit if they're different. But again, complement it. So you don't want to have a disconnect like, well, that job's not listed, or here the dates are wrong. Like, no. But, oh, this is interesting. Oh, look at all this additional information I now have, plus some links to projects, or I understand it more. So I think a lot of people do a shortcut, maybe even but for both. They just go, oh, here's my resume, boom, I'm gonna put it on LinkedIn, or here's my LinkedIn profile, put it on my resume. And be more strategic for both on that.
Okay.
And LinkedIn gives you the ability to be, you can show your personality a little bit more. A resume tends not to show your personality, and that's what the cover letter's for. So if you've got, use LinkedIn to show your personality, and because a cultural fit is huge, it really is. So as a hiring manager, again, if I have two people and maybe one of them has the job description experience that I need to a T, but this one just is going to be a better fit with a good experience, I'll probably hire that person, because it's so important to, be able to be effective in a team environment and working with different departments, et cetera.
Do you have an opinion in terms of resume versus like LinkedIn? I mean, obviously you're saying that both are important and you don't have one without the other, but in terms of like weight, or does it matter what industry you're in? One matters more than the other. I don't know if there's like a clear answer for this, but I would just love your opinion just because you're in.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I would say LinkedIn is important because a lot of times recruiters and managers will find you on LinkedIn. So not only do you want to make sure your profile is well fleshed out and written, but that you have your settings so that you're searchable if you want to be. And so make sure you do go in and if that you're showing that you're job hunting and you're open to opportunities so that people can find you. So I would say if you want people to reach out to you, you definitely want to put some time and effort into your LinkedIn profile, but that doesn't mean you should be able to neglect your resume, because that's what you're going to submit every time you apply for a job. And I don't like it when you only submit your LinkedIn profile. I do think you need to submit a resume and have it be customized and tailored to that position. They're going to look at your profile anyway, your LinkedIn profile. So, I guess both is my answer, Scott, of the importance. And I do think it probably varies by industry, and it probably varies by the hiring manager. Some people might not want to look at a resume, but you don't know who that's going to be, so you can't take that chance. And that's why I think a cover letter is so important. I hear far too many people say, oh, nobody reads them, therefore you don't need to do them. I read them. I find them very important. A majority of hiring managers and recruiters do, from what the statistics say. So you want to write one and you want to include it. And for the people who are that's important, that could be a deal breaker if you didn't have it. So you don't want to just assume that nobody's going to read it and therefore it's not important. And it plays such an important role because it answers questions that your resume doesn't or can't. So if you had a gap in employment, or you had an industry change that doesn't maybe make sense on looking at the resume, but makes perfect sense to you, you can explain that in a cover letter. Or you were tending to somebody who is sick with COVID, therefore that's why you have a gap in your employment. Or you loved working at a sports network, but you discovered that you really had an affinity for marketing, so you switched industries based upon what you learned by being in that environment. So that's how you use a cover letter. Again, you can show your personality. You can also talk about impact metrics and successes and achievements, which are huge on the cover letter, but I would pick different ones that are on your resume. So now I've got two sets of achievements that I can reference. And again, what I like to do on my cover letter is I'll look at the job description if I happen to be applying for one that has one, and I look at what the key roles and responsibilities are. And then that's what I focus on my cover letter. And that's where I make sure I have my achievements that align up with that. So then when they look at it, it's, oh wow, these are the 5 things I need. And she's done all that. And not only that, but she's got success metrics to show that she's actually really, done it and done it well. Because put yourself in the mindset of the recruiter or the hiring manager. They've got a problem, right? That's why they're hiring. So they're short-staffed. They don't have the right talent. They're overwhelmed. They've got a new responsibility that nobody can handle it. So by hiring, they're resolving whatever that problem is. So you want to position yourself so that you can come in and solve their problem, right? So that's why all that success metrics and achievements are so important, because I want to know, like, oh, if she's done that there and she can hit the ground running when she gets in here, oh, my life's going to be so much better. And that's what I need. So that's why cover letter shouldn't be more than a page. You're not telling your whole life story, and I really like a catchy opening. That's where your personality comes through too. I don't like, please find and close my resume for the position of XYZ. If I'm sending it to you, you pretty much know I'm applying to that. That's what the subject line of your email is for. So you can, I like to jump in about something like I'm a marketer that gets big results with very limited budgets. I can do the same for you. Or something that's gonna, grab my attention. I want to keep reading, And then you can, my final advice on cover letters is to not end in a passive I'll wait by the phone for you to call. I mean, nobody really says that, but that's what the message comes. You can't say, I'll call you next week to arrange an appointment, because a lot of times they don't post the phone number or you don't even know who the name is, but you can say, I look forward to further discussing how I can add value to your organization and drive results. Or something that assumes they're going to call you and that you assume you're going to have that opportunity. So,
Gina asked really quickly if you could touch on CVs and if that's more popular in certain industries, or, I don't know. I'm not as familiar with that. So I thought maybe you might have some opinions on that.
my understanding is CVs are important in education and a couple of more technical and medical industries, I would say, in for corporate America and in technology and stuff. A traditional resume is more common.
Okay, sounds good. Lastly, let's hit on interviews. This is obviously a loaded question. Once again, we could probably spend hours on this, but any interview tips you want to give to people, things maybe from an interviewer's perspective that you look for? What I find is being able to tell people what stands out, because I think they could try to emulate that and not be inauthentic, but make sure that they hit those things, because I think maybe what they're thinking and what the person who's interviewing them is thinking could be on two totally different wavelengths.
Yeah. I read about this in your personal career coach, Scott, because I had an interview that I thought went great. And ultimately, I totally blew it. And the reason I blew it is I was more focused on being charming, if you will, kind of showing my personality and how I was a cultural fit, that I neglected to show them how I was my experience and my skills fit. And so I answered the questions that they asked me, but I didn't ask them in a way that I was supporting my candidacy and showing them how I was a good fit for my skills. So I now equate it to a politician, and how they tend to answer the question that they want to answer versus what they were asked. And a lot of times we roll their eyes when they do it, but it's actually not a bad interview technique. And then I'm not saying go off the rails and ignore what they asked, but there are a way where in this interview that I blew, it was for a marketing position. So when I was answering their questions, I could have done a much better job of bringing in how I had tackled a similar challenge and what I had done and how I had done it and what the ultimate result was. Or ask questions like, would you like to hear more about how I think I could add value to this role, or change the way you're doing this, or something, rather than just answering their questions directly, which didn't always even relate to what they were looking for the position. We were kind of having a conversation, and I treated it like a conversation rather than an interview. And I think that's really easy to do, especially if the interviewee has been interviewing people for a long time. They probably are getting tired of the same questions they're asking. So they take a different approach and then maybe not get the right information from you. So if they're not asking that of you, make sure you're giving it to them anyway.
Great. I don't want to go too much into the chat box. I think we're going to touch on that later, but Shar did ask a good question. Are there different ways to approach interviews with talent acquisition teams versus a hiring manager?
Yes, in the sense that the talent acquisition manager wants to make sure that you check off all the boxes so they can send you to the hiring manager. So you really want to stay focused on your skills and your experience and how it relates to the job description as you know it. When you get to the hiring manager, then you can think more about not only the skills and the experience, but the cultural fit. The talent acquisition manager, they're going to know if you're totally not a cultural fit, but really their job is to bring X number of candidates who fit that job description. And so you really want to make sure that you've customized your resume and your cover letter, and you're answering those questions specifically to that job description.
Great. Hopefully that answered your question, Shar, but thanks for asking.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
And I would say also on interviewing, especially if you're new at it, or people always say, well, make sure you ask questions because that shows you're engaged, which is true. But asking the wrong question is not very effective. So the interview is not the opportunity to talk about or ask questions about benefits or vacation or things, how quickly are they going to decide? Really, your questions should be related to the job and what it would take, what success looks like if you got hired. So your questions can be things like, if I were to get this job, what would be the main 3 priorities that I'd be doing in the first 30 days, and how can I help you, achieve them? Or what are the main goals of the department, so that if I get this job, I can hit the ground running. What does success in this role look like to you? And not only are you asking a question, it gives you the opportunity to then have a follow-up opportunity to pitch yourself for that position. So if I say, what does successful look like in this position? And they say, oh, I need somebody who's going to be able to, be a self-starter and hit the ground running and get this project done in the next 30 days, then I can come back and say, oh, in my last job, I was known for the fact that I didn't need to be micromanaged. I was a good communicator. I was a good project manager. I kept everybody in the loop, and therefore I hit everything on time, and everybody could, be trusted to know that I was taking care of it and focus on other things so that they can have their own, responsibilities and be successful. Or so think about what questions you want to ask when you get to that point, that gets you information that you actually legitimately want. Because I think that's good. If somebody says, well, the definition of success is showing up at 8 o'clock and never taking a break until 10 o'clock, then you want to know that, because maybe that's not the job for you. But also so that you can find out what really is they're looking for that's important to them, and make sure you address that you have exactly what that is.
I'm actually quite relieved that you said that, because I was going to say what I always tell people when they ask me, what question should you ask? I usually say something along the lines of, tell me what the ideal person looks like in this role. And it kind of just flushes out all the different bullet points in the job description. Obviously, if you weren't a valuable candidate, you wouldn't be in there in the first place, and you are. Now it's your chance to sell yourself. But that, to me, shrinks the list of like 25 bullet points down to like 3, because they can't list everything. And then, like you said, you can address and follow up with those particular ones, because obviously that's what they care about. So no matter what it says on the piece of paper, when they tell you, hey, this is what I care about, this is what I care about, this is what I care about, then you're like, okay, you can address those. And right then and there, you may probably get a pretty good peek into what it's going to look like if you do land that role, and what to expect. And I think everybody wants to know, like, we don't like surprises for the most part. We want to sort of know what we're getting into. That's great. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you, okay, so we hear a lot about, what a supervisor or a boss wants from their workers, right? But on the flip side, when you're in your career and you have a supervisor, you have a manager, how do you manage that relationship effectively in your job, to the point where you obviously don't want to burn that bridge, because you burn that bridge, then there may be your walking papers. But also too, just how do you go about that in a proactive way, but not like in a rude or aggressive way where you're, hey, this is what I want, and demanding type things. It's sort of a delicate tightrope act, I guess. And I know that's something that you and I sort of, wanted to touch on. So I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and you bring up the point of this tightrope, and unfortunately, you don't get to pick your boss's communication style, and every boss is different. And so you might work with somebody who's extremely communicative and supportive, and explains everything in detail and gives you, attaboys or corrections. And then you might work with somebody who does none of those things. And I've worked with both of those. And again, I write about this in the book. I had this boss that he would say to me, I want you answering the phone as soon as you get in. And so I came in and I was answering the phone, and he just was getting mad at me. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Well, he wanted me there at a certain time, and I was not getting there at the time he wanted me to be there. And so, but that's not what he was saying. So it took me kind of figuring out what he was trying to say and effectively to figure out what. So it was just frustrating for both of us because he's expecting me to be showing up at a certain time. I'm thinking I'm doing what you're saying, but you're getting upset. And, you know, yuck, right? For everybody. So I've learned the hard way that a lot of working for somebody is, you know, managing my communication with them so that it helps minimize the misunderstandings, the miscommunication. And as a manager, I've implemented a lot of these same strategies. And I spent time in the book on that too, because for both you and your boss, or if you're the boss and somebody that you're working with, if you think you know the priorities and I'm off working on something like, yes, this is, you know, I'm nailing this. And then I sit down and find out that that wasn't the priority. Like, oh, right. It's like I've spent all this time. That's not, and then as the boss or was thinking, well, what the heck have you been doing? That's great, but I need these 3 things done beforehand. So I have a lot of tips on how you can minimize that frustration and then just get everybody on the same page. And then that elevates you and your abilities in the eyes of your colleagues, your teammates, and the management team as well. So a lot of things I like to do, and these are things I do in my own job or when I was a consultant too. So I put together, you know, a list of my priorities, and sometimes I'll email it. Sometimes I'll talk about it when I have a one-on-one meeting. You know, it doesn't always have to be super formal, but I know what those are. So this is what I'm working on this week or this month or whatever time frame that, you know, your company or your department works off of. This is the order that I'm working on, and as I see the priorities. And in that case, sometimes it is nice to have it written, whether it's a Slack message, an email, on a piece of paper across the desk, so that if somebody could say, oh, you know what, number 3 is actually the most important to me, and number 2 can wait, and, you know, number 5 forget completely or something like that. And then that just helps everybody be going in the right direction. And it also helps you understand better what the priorities are, so that you know what the end game is and what your contributions are going towards. Because otherwise, if you don't know, it's kind of frustrating, right? It's like I'm doing these tasks, but I don't know, I can't see where the payoff is or what part I play in the bigger organization. So it's great for your motivation. It's great for your communication. It's great for your understanding. And one of the simplest things, and I didn't realize how important this was until I had people do it for me, whether it was an advertising agency I was working with, but is just to confirm that you got the request. So can you please look this up? Can you please give me this? Can you please do that? Whatever the request is, even if it's not right away, it's like I sent something, here's the update, and saying, I'm confirming I received it. I've passed it along. As soon as we have an answer, we'll get back to you. Confirming that I got that request and I made the change to the email. And then your boss doesn't have to wonder, did they, and this is me, right? It's like, I got that, I've done it, no problem. I've checked it off my list. But if my boss doesn't know that I did, then they're always going, well, did Christy do it? Did she not? Do I need to go circle back? So you don't just alleviate that. Hey, done, taken care of. Again, that's a Slack message. It's a Teams message. It's a whatever you use. It's not a lengthy, discussion or anything like that, but just, and what it does, it paints you in a better light because they know now that things were taken care of. And it might seem like small and kind of like repetitious, but such a game changer as far as the relationship with you and your manager that I highly recommend everyone do it. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort for the payoff. It's a great little hack, communication hack, if you will.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear the clarification. I think that's really, really important early on. And, I've always felt like it's better to over communicate than under communicate, because a lot of times when you under communicate, we miscommunicate or we assume, and that'll get you in a lot of trouble, especially with, your boss. or your supervisor.
And especially right now in a world where we're all working virtually, if
Yeah.
you know your boss can't walk down the hall and say, "Hey, Scott, how's it coming with that?" Fill in the blank. So if you just say, "Hey," over communicate so that they know how it's coming, or here's the latest. If you're going to miss a deadline, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I know you wanted this by Thursday. I'm not going to make it by Thursday, but I should make it by Friday. Here's why, and here's what's happening." So again, they understand, they can follow the progress. So the two things I like to do is to establish the priorities and then show the progress. And again, this could be every Friday, it could be once a month. It kind of depends on the communication or the reporting in the position that you're in. And this is something I did as a consultant too, because it was always important when I was paid, hourly or by a project, that they knew that there was actually something happening and not just that I was out there, taking their money for nothing. So here's what I accomplished this week, or here are the steps that I took. Maybe I didn't accomplish anything that was done as a project, but I did these 3 things to move the project forward. And here's what I'm going to be focusing on next week. Let me know if you have any questions. And again, in a virtual world, it's nice to be able to say, oh, okay, now I know what she's been working on in this period of time. I can see the progress and I know what's going to be continue on to next week, or which ones are done and where I stand. So those, starting with understanding what the priorities are, getting on the same page, and then continue to communicate. I don't think you need to do it more than once a week. For some people that might be too much, but then keep them in the loop and in the know of where they. So you always want to answer the question before they can ask you it, instead of where are you, when's it coming? You've already given them the information, so they have all that.
Okay, let's talk really briefly about networking. I'll say let's maybe more focus on the virtual aspect, and also to things that people can be doing. I think, I always think that your network can never be too big or too strong. And it's not just purely a numbers game. I mean, it definitely helps, but there's building it stronger, like strengthening connections, and there's also like building it bigger in terms of how many connections. What's some of your advice for networking when it comes to doing it primarily virtual now?
Well, I think the main thing that people need to keep in mind is that networking, regardless whether it's virtual or not, is a give and take. So it's not just a take. So really, to do networking well, you want to help as much as, or even more, especially if it's a new relationship, than you're asking. So to send a LinkedIn request to meet somebody and then immediately say, hey, can you introduce me to somebody at Google? Or can you, give me a job interview? That doesn't feel great for anybody. So that's why I agree with you, Scott, when you're saying at the beginning of this conversation to get started now, not when you need, because you want to establish those relationships so they're primed and ready and really established, so that you are comfortable asking for help or a reference or a referral or an introduction, whatever it is that you're going to be asking for. If you wait until you need all that, then you're not going to have time to establish those relationships, or you're just going to be kind of spamming people and asking for them, and then that's not a very effective way. So it is a numbers game. The more you have in your network, the more opportunities you have. But I'd rather have fewer that have a really good relationship that I can go to and be confident that I'm going to get some whatever it is that I'm asking for, than to have this huge network and be able to only have a couple of people that I can, that I have to continually go back to or something like that. So I think it's fine to use LinkedIn to establish a relationship. I think that's great. That's what it's there for. Always personalize the message. If I get a non-personalized LinkedIn message, I assume right now that they're trying to sell me something. So I tend not to accept those. So if you're reaching out to somebody you've never met, either tell them that, how you came across them. Maybe you have some contacts that are mutual contacts, or you read an article or blog post that heard them on a podcast. you're fascinated by them, really want to, continue to have an open dialogue or follow them or whatever. Make sure they know that you're not a bot and that you're not a salesperson, and that, and then try to, then don't accept the invitation or have them accept it and then sit on it for 9 months and then hit them up, when you want to get an introduction to that company you're interviewing with. Even if it's just commenting on their posts on LinkedIn, that counts as an engagement. Forwarding them something you think they might be interested in, or if you see them again, just, hey, I saw you on this podcast. Want to make sure you saw it, something like that. So it's if for people who don't like networking, it's a lot easier, I think, to do virtually than it is in person. You're not walking into a room full of strangers, shaking hands and interjecting yourself into conversations. But it's still work, and that there's the outreach and the follow-up and the nurturing of the relationship that needs to continue.
Yeah, I'll just add to that and just say that I think the more you can treat the virtual like a real relationship that you would, sort of meet in person. I like to use the word connecting more than networking. I think sometimes networking gets sort of a bad rap, but just the idea of how would you build like a normal friendship or relationship? You're not going to just go in there and just say, hey, how's it going? By the way, can I get a job? Like you could do that, but they're probably not going to like you. They're probably not going to give you what you want. And quite frankly, if someone did that to you, you're not going to like that. So it's just sort of maybe kind of dropping your agenda at the beginning part and being more curious and just trying to get to know them. And if something works out, great. If something doesn't, hey, maybe you can at least grab a friend from it, but you'll quickly know whether you're going to follow up with the person and probably have a relationship with them or not. I'd say for the most part, unless you're like a really hard personality, you'll probably like, a good percentage, like 80-75% of the people that you meet or whatever like that, because it's very limited. And then, from there, you can sort of figure out, quality over quantity for the most part in terms of like frequency. But the follow-up piece is really, really important. And I think, just kind of like, if you think about something and sort of top of mind, like send them a message or something like that, like I think people that I've touched base with who I would consider like leads at first, end up being like, customers, clients, partners, whatever you want to call it, because I kind of just show interest in them over time, and some people are not going to fit, it's not going to work, and that's fine or whatever like that, but if you have a general interest in somebody, I think they kind of pick that up, whether it be virtual or in person. I think that people kind of get that vibe, and hopefully you're giving off that vibe, because if you're not, then it could be just the opposite. But sometimes I would just say my advice is just like, don't over trivialize it. Like people are people, treat them like that. Try to make it as non-transactional as possible, because I think people get the feel like, hey, if you're selling me something, I don't want to talk to you. When I get these like messages on LinkedIn and it's just like this long like page thing, I'm like, obviously you cut and pasted that. And even though maybe you feel in your mind that was impressive, I'm just going to hit delete. So, and these are people that have already connected with me. So it's like, not the greatest first impression, I'd say.
Well, and I would say, I agree with you on a couple of things. One is, don't underestimate the power of you commenting or liking on their LinkedIn post, because that helps whatever they posted get in front of more people. So that's really powerful, and it's easy to do, but that's really appreciated usually by the person. And then the other thing, because we're networking virtually right now, and everybody tends to be working from home, I think you have more leeway to get on the phone with somebody, to do a Zoom call. You're not asking for somebody to meet you at the Pete's Coffee, that they have to leave their office, drive 3 miles, get out of their car, and come sit with you for 20 minutes. You're just saying, hey, can we get on Zoom for 20 minutes now? And it's a much easier ask and a much easier yes for the person who's doing it. If you're asking for an informational interview, I love informational interviews. And this is a great time to do those, because again, people don't have to go to a lot of effort to meet with you or have you come to their office or something like that. And you're not asking for a job. You're not selling yourself for a job. You're not even giving them your resume. An informational interview is doing that. You are asking information. You're learning whether it's a industry, it's a company, maybe it's a role. I'm thinking about going into, web development, but I've been in marketing. Can I talk to you because you've done that? I want to open my eyes and see if this is going to be something, if it's really what I think it is. I'd love to work for Google. Can I learn more from you about it? See if it's what I think it is, how I can maybe, what I need to learn, what kind of background I need to be able to get my foot in the door, those kinds of things. And what Scott said is that might not lead to what you're looking for, but they might lead you to somebody else who does, or they're going to introduce you to the next person that you're going to have an informational interview with. And that person might know of a job opening, or that person might know the hiring manager at the company that your dream job would be in or something. So it's, even though that particular, connection, and I love that word, by the way, Scott, is maybe doesn't deliver exactly what it's kind of like my job story at the beginning, right? All those are going to lead to something, and then it's all going to circle back and make perfect sense at some point. So you just never know who's going to be the right one until you go through. But informational interviews or coffee talks or whatever you want to call them, you always want to take that opportunity to say, hey, is there somebody else that you think I should connect with, or I should talk to, or ask questions of, that could help me down my journey? Again, you're not asking for a job. You're not asking them to look at your resume. You're not asking to send your resume to somebody yet. And if you do those things, then nobody's going to want to give you eventually you'll run out of informational interviews. So you really want to approach it as, this is for me to learn. And I value your time. So I'm going to ask for 20 minutes. I'm going to keep it to 20 minutes unless you tell me, to keep going. And then close it by asking, is there somebody else you think that I should, approach for another informational interview? I know that wasn't a topic, Scott, and I got a little off topic, but that's
good.
It's a great tool, especially now when you can do it via Zoom, via Skype, via Teams, via phone. I think that's an opportunity that too many people are missing out on, especially in a tough job market too. It's a great way to find opportunities eventually that maybe aren't even posted, because a lot of jobs are not posted. Majority, if you look at the stats, the majority of jobs are not ever posted on a job board. So if you're spending your whole time looking at job boards for your next opportunity, you're missing out on 70% of them, because that's not where they are. They're going to be found through your network.
Right. That's great. This is a great transition into our next part, which is, let's talk a little bit about your book. Obviously, you can't go fully into it. I would probably almost advise you to kind of give a teaser to some degree, but let's touch on two aspects really quickly. The career advice that you give in there, and then also to the work-life balance. Those are sort of maybe two chunks of many other chunks that are in there.
Yeah.
Would love to sort of just like talk about that a little bit. I want you to maybe either show the book and or type the name into the chat box so people can sort of see that. That'll probably lead us into a Q&A. But I would love for you to sort of talk about that now, because obviously a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, is going to be, if not all of it's covered in there. Would love to have people, get excited about having the opportunity to get that book in front of their hands and be able to kind of see that. So
yeah, there they are behind me. You're a Personal Career Coach. That's the book that I wrote with my dad, although it's 25 contributing authors. So it's a little bit of chicken soup for the soul meets what color is your parachute. So it's career advice told in story format. And we cover everything from getting an interview to you're working with your boss, networking, all these things we talked about. And it's a book where you can pick it up and put it down. It's not a necessarily read from cover to cover. And the stories are, Scott's got a couple of articles. So for that reason, you guys should all get it. So if you had a job interview, you could go to the section on how to interview, or networking. You could go to and read a couple stories on that. So, and it's all told from our perspective of, like I said, I talk about an interview that I had that I thought went great, and it turns out, no, not so much. And so the other book is your Career Survival Guide. That one was written quickly, specifically for the situation we're in now with the job market of COVID. So it's strategies and tactics to help you get a job when it's a tough job market, and then how you can excel in a job in this specifically too. So it's a short book that's really meant to address more very specific about, tough job markets. And some of that is being in a job you don't want to be in, because it's not an easy job market to switch industries right now, or jobs right now. But one of my favorite stories in your personal career coach is related to what Scott mentioned, was the balance, the work-life balance. And what I've discovered is work-life balance isn't 50-50 on a daily basis. So it's not an even, it tends to ebb and flow, but you want to ultimately have that balance over time. So maybe it's taking time off, maybe it's coaching, or a kid's baseball team, but you work extra hours on different days or something like that. But the hard lesson that I learned is, as I mentioned, I tend to work long hours, and there's a great story in there about not confusing activity with achievements, because I did a lot of activity, but I wasn't necessarily achieving what was important to the company. So it doesn't matter how long you're there working hours, you don't get brownie points for long hours, you get brownie points for results. But anyway, so I was working long hours, and I was missing out on way too many important events because I thought I needed to do it for the job. And one of the things that I now do is I kind of just ask myself a simple question: is if it's deciding between, working on this project or going to have dinner with my mom or watching my niece in a dance recital, in 5 years, will I remember, will the company remember what I was working on? Or in 5 years, am I going to remember that I missed it? What's going to be the thing that sticks with me? And when it comes down to that simple of a question, I almost always go to the experience and leave the work at home. There's always going to be more work. There's always going to be more responsibilities. There's always going to be things due. But it kind of just makes it real clear on where to draw the line. And if you're working on a merger and acquisition, or there's a communication crisis, yeah, sometimes you're going to have to miss out on the experience or the family relationships or something. But a lot of times it's not that. The things that I'm working on were not that important for me to miss out on. And I look back now and I think about some of the things that I might not remember the specifics of what I missed, but I remember not being there enough and stuff. So I would just caution everybody. It's real easy to get caught up in work and work projects. And one of the other stories I talk about is work is not your family. I always now cringe when they say, oh, we're a family. It's like, no, you're really not. Your family doesn't fire you because of budget cuts or a bad economy, or, a family doesn't give you the option to be reassigned or move, to a different country or something like that. So if you're doing some of the things thinking, oh, they're my family, they're going to take care of me, I would caution you to, I don't want to make it sound like it's terrible or anything like that, but they're not making decisions about you the way your family would make decisions about you.
I actually really like that. I'm going to use that. I've always believed in sort of separating the two, work and life, or work and personal, or professional and personal, whatever like that. I don't know if everybody feels that way, but I find it very easy to walk into a situation where I'm like consulting and step out of there and just sort of leave all the emotions there. I don't know if that's easy for everybody, but I kind of like to turn a switch on, turn a switch off, and sort of leave it. I think when it blends, it can get kind of messy, a little bit dirty. So yeah, I think that's great advice.
And I've worked with people who I really like, and we've gone out for drinks. I played on a softball team, and I'm not saying that's, you don't want that. That's great. It's just, you got to understand where the separation is of making decisions of what's best for you and your career versus the company. And because they're not making decisions based on how much they like you, or right, how much they enjoy having you around or something. well, gee, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, or, those kinds of things that we say like, well, I really like being here. I've been here too long, but I just have such a good time. And, maybe I should stay for a little bit longer. And like, but push comes to shove, if they stop selling whatever they're making and they had to make cuts, they're not going to say like, oh, Christy's we really like her, we'll keep her, no, so.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's harsh reality, but it's
It
reality.
is harsh reality.
Yeah.
And it's, I've seen it happen, and you don't want to be blindsided by that. So take care of yourself first.
Yeah, good advice, good advice. So before we go into Q&A, I always pause and sort of give like a little promo time. I'm going to start, and then I'm going to let Christy sort of bring it in afterwards. I actually brought up your site, so I can put that in the link afterwards. Okay, there you go. Beat me to it. Please do check that book out. I was going to say for myself too, I'm actually working on a project I want to launch next month. And I talk primarily about soft skills. That's what I did my TED talk on. That's what I do most of my talks on. And what I'm doing is I have a survey. I'm going to type into the link right now. If you could take that, I would really appreciate it. It's really just to get a feedback in terms of how to formulate the program. As a business owner, when you go into a situation where you have this idea, sometimes going into it with the mentality of like, oh, I have it, I know what people think and blah, 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 you could be way off. And so what I found is that surveys have been really helpful for me to pinpoint what are the needs, what do people really care about, the details that maybe I just kind of guess on, and rather than guess, I'd rather just sort of know. So there's no commitment in it. It does say if you're interested in the program and you want to know when it's launched, you put your email address in there, but there's also the option where you could just fill the survey out and just leave it. But I've already had some responses come in. And it's been helpful because it's sort of, some of the things I'm like, oh yeah, I guessed that right. And some of them I'm like, I was way off. So it really sort of, helps me. So I would love if you could do that. You don't have to do it like immediately right now, but it's a pretty quick thing. You could probably finish it in 5 minutes. And then Christy typed in her site right there. Yeah. So if you want to check her stuff out, please do. Feel free to do that. Her 2 books. I didn't even know about the second one that came out, and obviously she's very timely with it. So she's taking advantage of the opportunities, which I think is great. I
got some freebies on the site if you want some. I've got some freebies on doing your resume, cover letters, informational interviews, so much of the other stuff I talked about. So you can find them on there too, and happy to help you as you guys all venture into this career journey of your own.
Cool. Okay, so to jump off into Q&A, I didn't forget you. I think it's Nicolay. Sorry if I butchered that, but that's how I read it. His question was, what would you recommend on finding a new job at a director level position in IT? Pretty specific. And
yes.
Then that, if you guys have questions, either type them in, or actually I would prefer if you would just take yourself off of, the blacked out video camera and just came on and asked the question. That would make Christy and I feel better. But if you want to type it in, you can do that too.
So I'm assuming based on the question that it's I can't tell if you're already in that position and you want it in a different company, or you're looking to pivot completely. So I would say your network is probably, either way, your network is going to be what's going to help you uncover where you should be talking to people. So hopefully you have a well-established network. And then again, when you ask, and I shouldn't say again, because I didn't address this, when you ask your network for help, this is my opinion, people really want to help. They generally like to help other people. So don't be afraid to ask for help, but be very specific, because if you're not very specific of what you're looking for, it's hard to just kind of be helpful if you don't know what you're doing. So if you say, I'm looking for a new job at a director level position in IT, do you have anybody that you recommend I should talk to or reach out to? Then I can say, well, gee, I don't know really anything about IT, but I know the guy that's in IT at my company. Maybe he's somebody you could talk to figure out what maybe there are job boards you should be looking at that I don't know about. Maybe he knows of an industry organization, or he knows, turns out he knows somebody who's looking, that kind of thing. So that's where you can utilize your network to really help kind of do your research and uncover where the opportunities might be or where you should be looking for the opportunities. And then make sure your resume and your cover letter look like somebody and addresses what a director level in IT, what they're looking for.
Great. And if it matters, he did clarify and said he's in the same position right now. So.
Okay, so just in a different company. So that's great. So make sure your LinkedIn profile is updated. Make sure you've changed your settings so that you're open to opportunities. That's really important, especially for right now, if you're looking to change companies. That makes it even easier because you don't have to sell yourself on going into a different industry or a different job. But when jobs do open up, recruiting managers are getting bombarded with resumes because it's a top job. So a lot of times they're not even doing that. They're going after you and finding people. So again, make sure you've got a great LinkedIn profile and people know that you're open to opportunities.
And there he is on screen.
There he is. All of a sudden I saw that appear.
Yeah, I have an additional question to it, just because I've been kind of passively looking for the past few months. I still have a full-time job at the same position. But the interesting moment, I didn't use my network just because it's kind of too weak to that level of positions, because I'm not for a long time has been living in the US. And the problem is I don't receive any response on my application. That's kind of concern. Despite when I'm asking for advice on my resume, usually people say that's way too good to add anything to it.
So I had a little hard time hearing you, but it sounds like you're applying for positions and you're not hearing back from them, even though other people are telling you you have a good resume.
Yeah, he said yes.
Okay. So my first recommendation would be is make sure you do have a good resume. But if people are saying that, and I guess that's important for everybody to know, you don't hear from people, you don't get rejection notices in this day and age anymore. The only time you might get a no thank you is if you've actually interviewed with them, but you will not hear anything from, you won't get a message if all you've done is submit your resume and they're not interested in you. You just don't hear back. So sadly, that's just the way that it works right now. So they won't give you any feedback if you're asking as to why or something like that. They're just, companies don't do that, and they don't want to be responsible legally for saying something that they think puts them at risk. So don't expect that. So it is hard to know, to Nicolay, your question of why, if everybody thinks my resume is great and I'm not hearing anything, I guess I would say make sure you have your achievements and what you've accomplished, not just your job description. And then if you still aren't hearing anything, then maybe find somebody who's in the industry or something, and maybe have them review your resume or the job description and see what maybe is a disconnect or why it's not being noticed. And yeah, that's a tough one. It's also, there's just a lot more people applying for every open position right now. So it's the odds are unfortunately working against job seekers at the moment. Sometimes it's the other way around, not right now.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
Anyone else want to come on camera, ask a question? You're also feel free to type it in also too, but this is your chance to ask Christy a question that would probably be better answered here than on email or social media or however else you want to try to get a hold of her. And it could be, very much in your personal situation. I think that's the beauty of like Q&A is that you get to ask, something very specific to what you want to know, not just a general question. So.
Yeah. So I see the question, how do you look for a job when you already have a job? So one thing that if you do want to turn on your LinkedIn settings, they do say that they do try to protect your privacy from your current employer, so they don't broadcast it to everybody that you're looking. Looking for a job is time consuming, I know. So I would say make sure you're really focused on jobs that are a fit for you or industries that you're really interested in. Don't just be burning time to say you're looking for a job when you have limited time as it is. I know it's a little harder to network, especially if there's some sensitivity. Probably don't want to be posting things in that case, but you can maybe do things one-on-one and asking for introductions, one-on-one and using LinkedIn messages, or if you have another way to reach out that isn't quite so public. And most companies these days do not confirm your employment or look for references until you're well down the path. So you don't typically have to worry about somebody spilling the beans, before you're ready to tell your employer. If you're worried about that and you get to the point where you're interviewing, you could explicitly say that, my employer doesn't know that I'm looking right now. So if we can, when you're ready to reach out to them, if you could let me know so I can make sure that if I, need to inform anybody, I do and have that opportunity. But really, I think it's a time management more than anything, because you have to put in the hours doing your job and then use your off hours. But if you have a company computer and you're on their IP, you can expect that they can legally look to see what you're doing. So I would recommend not using company time to be job searching. Just to assume they're watching, even if you don't know that they can, if you're working from home or something like that. And either do it on a different computer or do it on your off hours.
Yeah, I would say too, to add to that, this is not necessarily advice, but the best time to look is when you are employed, and that's when you're the most attractive anyway. So obviously you want to be a little bit covert about it. Sadly, I would say to Christy's comment that I was at a job when I knew a lot of people were looking during company hours. I don't know if they knew that people were going through their search, and I wouldn't recommend it, but that's kind of the reality. Some people are more slick than others, I guess, but we're in a time where, whether we were in this situation that we're in right now or not, people are kind of constantly always looking. So I think you have to understand that that's normal, and that that's just how the job market sort of works.
And in this market, I would not leave a job to go look for a new job. Scott's right. You're more attractive if you have a job. It's the sad truth. And because it's a tough job market, you don't want to find that it takes longer than you think to find a new job. And now you have, financial challenges or a gap in your resume. So, stay in your job, suck it up, read my book on how to love a job you hate, and then continue your job hunt, and then make a, transition from one job to the other. You can take some time off in between, but I would not leave a job right now unless you're being, treated poorly, harassed, something that's really significant. I would, do your best to stay with it and job search while you're still working.
Samantha has a good one. And I'm going to kind of sum it up because we've talked before, but how do you network internally within the organization, not wanting to be, I guess, perceived as someone who's trying to leave their particular position. And I do actually agree with networking internally, even if you're not looking for another job. I just think it's important and smart to sort of know what's going on in different departments, things like that. But any thoughts in terms of going about that professionally, but at the same time too, being effective doing it?
Yeah, I think, I look back to one of my first jobs that I talked about, where I was in the production department, but I was looking at what marketing was doing. So I, on my lunch hour, I'd walk over and say, hey, what are you guys doing? Can you introduce me to a little bit more? And, kind of is an informational, and also volunteer for projects. If people are looking for, you could say, hey, would love to help you out in addition to what I'm doing on my real job or my day job, or, what. But if there anything that comes up within the company, if they're looking, it's a great way to get additional skills outside of your department. You'll meet new people, and you're continue to add value to the company. So and you don't have to wait to be asked. You can, ask around, ask your boss, ask other people, managers, hey, is there any, projects that you need additional help on or that I can volunteer for? And make sure they know it's volunteering.
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to that too, a lot of it is like, how do you get noticed? Like if you put your head down and do your work, that's fine, but people are going to overlook you, and I'm not saying that you need to completely play the political game, but you also can't sit on the sidelines. And so, you have to be, I would say for the most part, you need to be proactive. And that can flesh itself out in different ways. But, if you don't do anything to make noise to get noticed, then you're not going to get noticed. That's just kind of how things are in general. I think
you do have to toot your own horn a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's why talking about your successes on your resume does that. That's why doing a project report at the end of the week and reminding people what you did, what you've accomplished, what you're working on, that just gets to elevate your profile a little bit more rather than, well, I know that she's a hard worker because I see her over there all the time, but, kind of like what I was saying, push comes to shove, if they have to make difficult decisions, if you've been telling everybody everything you're working on and what those results were and how you bring value to the company, then they're going to pick the person that they're not really sure what they're doing, only because maybe they were just more quiet about it. Maybe it was equally as important, but they didn't remind everybody as much.
So true. So true. Nicolay had a sort of a follow-up question. He basically kind of says that other companies are offering better compensation for a job, like maybe one level down, and personally, he said he probably would take it. But he wants to know, how do employers treat candidates in that way? So if, you're applying to a job and you're basically taking a step down, do they look upon that favorably? Do they kind of scoff at that? I don't know. What do you think?
That's a tough one because yes, you might have to, for your next job or your next position, if you didn't get elevated to the level that you're at, you might have to address, why is that title looking like it's, they might not say a step down, but, and so you either need to be prepared to say it was a fabulous compensation package and, or maybe the titles are different. Maybe it was the same responsibilities, but the way that and that happens, that's very common in some companies is, director titles are very rarely given and a VP is very exclusive. And in some companies, everybody's a VP. And if you don't have a VP title, people wonder, so you just need to be able to feel confident and being able to address that in whatever way, because it will likely be something, if they don't ask you specifically, that they'll note it. So you might want to even proactively address it in a cover letter or an interview or something like that for your next step.
Great. So we probably have time for one really quick question. If not, we might close things out, but I'll give 10, 15 seconds if someone wants to jump in.
Quick, jump in
the chat. Okay. Well, unless anyone interrupts me, I'm going to kind of close down a little bit. First of all, I want to say thank you, Christy. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise and giving us your thoughts on a very tricky, subject. Career advice in general is just something that people are always wondering about. And most of the time they're asking because they're asking for themselves. And so it was great to be able to also, for me, just to hear your thoughts on where the job market is and sort of what things you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. Because honestly, a lot of those answers, they change over time. We also want to thank General Assembly for hosting it. I love partnering with them and they've been great to me. And so I appreciate the opportunities that I've been able to have with them. And lastly, I just want to thank everyone who stayed on the call. Appreciate you asking your questions and staying on and listening. Hopefully what you heard is something that you can apply. I think Christy would agree that, we could give this advice and sort of talk about things, but we want it to be applicable. We want it to be tangible. We want it to be something you can take away and actually do something with. And so don't just let this information kind of sit in your head. Go out there and apply it, plug it in, go get her book. Go get both of her books actually, and look them through, because your career is something that you're going to care about for a long time, and you're going to have to know sort of the inside tips to be able to go after it. And for those of you, if this is your first event with me, I just want to let you know that I send a newsletter out to all the people who have attended, who have signed up, let you know about future events, also future services and or programs that I'm going to push. And how I like to sort of end things off before we say goodbye is I throw it back to the speaker and let her, in this case, Christy, know what's sort of like your last thing you want to leave people with. What's kind of that burning tip that you want people to etch in their minds, at least for tonight, that they'll act on?
Yeah, and Scott did not prep me on this one, so I'm definitely talking off the cuff here, but I would say, yes, my advice, I try to make it be actionable and helpful. So pick something that I said and implement it. Maybe go tomorrow, find a new network connection on LinkedIn and reach out to that person, or comment on their post, or open up your resume and take a look at it and see if it's addressed some of the things. Whether you're looking for your first job or your next job, it's a process. And so just doing something, it can feel overwhelming. So, or even working with your boss, right? So just pick something to make some progress. So maybe it's, making sure you have your impact metrics up to date. And then in the next day, maybe you'll do a little searching to see what industries are hiring or something. But don't wait till you have 8 hours nonstop to do it, because that never happens, right? That never happens in anything we're doing, right? So just take small baby steps and make forward progress every day, and you're going to get there. Whether that's getting a promotion, that's increasing your relationship with your boss, elevating yourself at your current company, networking, informational interviews, whatever. So just do something, and small bites, and keep at it.
Great. So feel free also to reach out to us and connect with us on LinkedIn. You can type both of our names in. It's pretty easy to send. Like Christy said, though, you probably want to send somewhat of a introduction, or we think you're some random stranger, hitting us up for something. But I would just say, sort of my last piece is, like, in this day and age where everything's sort of virtual, that you have to network harder, and part of that is just following up. And so I hope that with all the content that's out there, including the stuff that we said today, you have to do something with it. You can't just like sort of sit there and say, oh, I did it, I went to this event, sort of thing. That's professional development for me. You want to act on it. So if that means that you send a connection request to Christy or myself, and we accept it, and then we sort of have a follow-up conversation, I can tell you on a personal note that when I normally speak and people send me connection requests and we sort of go back and forth, I've gotten clients that way. I've gotten business that way. Sometimes we just have good conversations. It's almost always a net positive. So I would just encourage you, don't sit back and be passive and wait for things to happen. If that happens to you, great. But there's the effort piece on your part you can control. And so go out in there and do that. But with that being said, I just want to thank you again. Thank you, Christy, most of all, for all the great content. And I look forward to seeing you guys at a future event. We tend to have them twice a month, so be on the lookout for the email. And have a good rest of the night. And please apply some of these tips, and hopefully you'll be better off for it tomorrow. All right. Good night, everyone.